Hello everyone, my name is Raymond and welcome back to the next installment of the Project Feline Devlog series, documenting the development of my dream game from start to end. This video will be picking up from where we left off in my last episode about creating a 3D anime character from scratch in Blender. Before we begin, huge thank you to all who watched and supported the last episode, and a huge welcome to all the newcomers to the show. At the time of this recording, I think it's now standing as my most viewed video, and we have a lot of new people interested in this project, so thank you all for joining me on the next part of my journey, and I'm super excited to show you what I've got in store for you today. In this episode, I'll be showing you the completion of this base model, and then turning this base model into the protagonist of the game, Gabriella. We'll also be looking at the redesign and modeling process of her feline suit. So without further ado, let's get into it. So continuing from what we had in the last episode, the first thing I needed to do was finish off this base model by adding the rest of the details needed. I started just by adding in the details I knew that approximately every character would need. One of these details was fleshing out the inside of the character's mouth, so that later I'd be able to animate the character opening and closing the mouth to create all sorts of different facial expressions and dialogue. Modeling this was rather tricky, as the entire mouth is inside of the model, so I had to model this in a way where it was big enough to house proper teeth and a tongue, but not too big as to clip outside of the face's geometry. It's also very difficult to make reference for this sort of thing. You don't often find just model sheets of the inside of a mouth on Google, so I went and looked at some models on Sketchfab, which is a website where people can upload their own 3D models. A lot of models on here had these bits modeled in, so I went and took a closer look using their inspector tools to see how the geometry looked, and tried to mimic it in my own model.
Nope.
After that, I then went in to model some anime-styled eyelashes and eyebrows to give more character to the base model. Now at this point you may be wondering why I've decided to model all of these details in rather than using sprites or textures. And one of those reasons is because I'm not particularly good at texturing and I'm not that fond of the process, so I wanted to achieve most of the detail through modeling if possible. Modeling in the details in this way also grants us a lot of flexibility for the later stages. For example, when we get to the rigging and animation stage, we'll be able to fully rig up the face with bones and controllers. To do this with texturing and sprites, I'd have to hand draw and animate each facial feature by hand. If I was to animate the eyes or mouth and wanted to change or iterate on something, I'd have to hop back into Photoshop and draw up a whole new set of sprites, all by hand. Or at least that's my understanding of how a textured workflow would turn out. Again, texturing's not my strong suit. I'm a lot more confident as a modeler, so I wanted to try and play to my strengths and model in as much detail as I could. Also, while looking at Sketchfab for anime-styled models, I found that many of them rely on models and shaders to achieve their look, and they do a pretty convincing job of it too. They only seem to use textures in certain cases, like for the iris, or to achieve things like freckles.
Nope.
So, after fleshing out all these details, it was now time to transform this base character into our protagonist, Gabriella. I started off by modeling her key characteristics, her hairstyle and the cat ear. The hair was by far the most difficult thing to model. I don't have much experience in modeling hairstyles, so I tried to gather as much reference as I could. I stuck mainly to the methods demonstrated in Daniel Kruter's anime character tutorial series, where Daniel draws each strand of hair out of polygons and combines them together into a single mesh. However, I had to improvise my approach a bit, as the character in Daniel's tutorial began to differ a lot from my own once the base model was completed. Gabriella's hair is comprised of two layers, the base layer and the top layer. The top layer sits on top of the base layer, and is where most of the shape and style is modeled in. I started modeling the hair symmetrically at first to save myself some time, which I often do with most of my models. Once I had the general shape and details modeled in, I then merged the two halves together and started modifying the geometry to look less symmetrical and more natural. When I started modeling this piece, I started with the hairline in the middle to help with the symmetrical modeling, but once merging it, I then moved the hairline over to the right side of the head and then rearranged the strands of hair to accommodate for this. And after about a week of learning and modeling, here is the final result for Gabriella's base model. As it is currently, I think I nailed the style I was going for in 3D pretty closely. However, I feel like the geometry for the hair still looks a little jagged. I'm not sure if players will even notice this in-game, but I'll leave you guys to decide in the comments. The next thing we'll be looking at in this episode is the development of the Feline suit. Last episode, I showed you guys a reference image I had drawn up of the suit with the finalized design. And after posting the video, I got lots of great feedback from you guys. So before I started modeling it, I wanted to implement a few final changes to make it the best we possibly could. The most common critique was of the size and proportions of the thigh pieces on the armor, and I agree, yeah, they looked a little big. So I wanted to try and fix that up, as well as make some other design changes to the boots in particular, as they felt that they seemed a bit off and I think I could have done a better job. So I hopped right back into Photoshop to make some final revisions to the armor. I reduced the size of the thigh pieces, as many of you guys pointed out, they did seem a bit too big for the proportions of the armor. They also seemed rather heavy, and I think a lot of you guys would agree that it didn't seem to fit well with a game about parkour movement. I also redesigned the boot and shoe, as I found that the original looked a bit too much like a high-tech Converse All-Star rather than functional boots. So I took some inspiration from Halo and Overwatch to get a better idea on what a futuristic boot should look like, and here is the final redesign after about a day of sketching and refining. I then re-exported this from Photoshop, imported it into Blender, and began modeling the Feline suit. Now, as mentioned in the last video, I wanted to build the components for Gabriella in a modular and reusable way. This aim was no different for the Feline suit. I wanted to build it in a way where I could easily reuse it and put it on another character or use it to make different skins and variants. So I split up the model into different parts: the undersuit, the torso, the thighs, the kneecaps, and the boots. I began modeling the suit by simply tracing the reference with vertices and then connecting them up and filling them to create a solid 3D shape. I think I underestimated just how complex this was going to be. I'm very detail oriented and I love drawing detailed characters and designs. However, I never tried my hand at modeling something in 3D with this amount of detail. It took a lot longer than I initially expected, as there were a lot of approximations that I didn't account for in the sketch. For example, I have a lot of segmented pieces bolted together in the sketch. However, achieving this look with clean topology in 3D was rather difficult. I found that as I worked on the model longer, the reference sketch began to make less and less sense. I had to improvise and redesign a few things on the fly, especially areas like the backside plate and the ankle joint on the boots. I suppose this goes to show that you shouldn't get too anxious and fixated on sticking 100% to the reference image, as there's bound to be heaps of mistakes and errors, especially from a handmade drawing. But despite all this, I managed to work on the model and get it finished, and here is the final redesign and model after another week of modeling. I was hoping to reach the texturing stage a lot sooner, however, building this suit took a lot longer than anticipated. So I will be commencing the unwrapping and texturing phase in the next video, so be sure to stick around. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you so much for your patience. I know this video was a little late, and I didn't quite get to the stage I wanted to, but sometimes that's just how development goes. If you found this video helpful or insightful in any way, be sure to hit that like button. So hopefully in the next video, we will get to the UV mapping and texturing process. So be sure to subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss the next upload. As always, any critique, comments, and feedback is well appreciated, and you're welcome to leave those in the comments of this video. You can support the production of these videos on Patreon, like these supporters. Patrons help keep me producing these videos and allow me to justify more of my time towards making these. So huge thank you to my Patreons for this month. And of course, I'd like to thank the artists behind this month's wonderful Project Feline fan art submissions. If you'd like to have your fan art featured in these videos, be sure to join the community Discord linked in the description. You can also participate in discussions about game design, programming, art, and music, anything creative. So if you're interested in those topics, I have the Discord linked below. If you'd like to see more frequent updates in between uploads, be sure to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for following my journey, and I will see you all in the next one.